Okay, so in this video we're going to implement the blocks that we actually need to destroy. If I just put a prefab here, if I go into my prefabs folder and if I drag one of these wood planks here, let's see if the apple hits one of these. I'm not sure where it's gonna, where the direction is gonna be pointing to. Okay, you see that the movement gets reflected, but the block doesn't get destroyed. So what we need to do here is inside the Apple script, we already have, of course, the function that detects collision. And since we have no special functionality for the block, we don't need to write a specific script just for it and to detect collisions and do pretty much the same thing we did here. Okay, so we can use the same onCollisionEnterToD function of the Apple to check if we're colliding against a block. Let's see the possibilities we have here. We can be colliding with the platform and we can be colliding with the screen collider. These are the two possible collisions so far. Now we've added another one, which is the wood plank. So we have three possible collisions in our game. The apple can collide with itself, so this is not a possible case. Alright, so you can see that inside the onCollisionEnterToD function, we've checked two possible collisions. We've checked the collision with the collider creator, which is down here. We checked the collision with the platform, which is down here. So in case these two get missed, I must have been colliding with one of these wood blocks, so I don't even have to try to get a reference for it. I'm sure that if I don't get inside any of these two if statements, this one or this else if statement, if I put an else statement here, I must be colliding with one of the wood planks because I just have, as said, three possible colliders I can collide with, and two of them already have been checked here. So the third one must be the one that remains, which is the wood plank. And what I want to do in this case is I want to destroy the element that I'm colliding with. Because I already have a reference for the normal, let's just make sure we pass in that normal reference we got instead of accessing the contacts again. So we can just pass in normal because we already have defined a reference for the normal here. So in this case, I just want to destroy collider.gameObject, which is the game object that took part in this collision. So you can use destroy. So you can use the destroy method for any kind of component. So if you want to destroy a specific component of an object, you can also use the destroy method. In this case, I'm using the destroy method to destroy the whole game object, so it's going to disappear from our scene. And if you go back to Unity, you can see that this is going to work flawlessly. If I try it, oh, there you go. Oh, it happened. As you can see, it got destroyed, the movement got reflected, there are no errors in the console, so it looks like it's working perfectly. What I also want to do is I want to increase a value that holds the number of blocks that I've already destroyed. And we're going to do this in another script that's going to keep our score. So inside the scripts folder, I'm going to create a new one, and I'm going to call it Game Manager. So any game has a game manager script that controls, let's say, the brain of our game, has some specific things to do with scores and all of that. In this case, we're going to keep our score inside this class. And for now, we can just keep it as a static integer. So public static int, let's say, points. So what a static value is? A static value is a value that doesn't need a reference for an object to get accessed. So what it means in practical terms is that we can just access the class name, which is Game Manager, and then we already have a value for this attribute, which gets shared between all the instances of the Game Manager. So it's basically one value for all of the different instances that might exist, in case there's no instance that's required to access this attribute. So what I can do now inside the Apple script, instead of just destroying the game object, I want also to increase that value. So game manager, that's our class. Now we are accessing the class and not an object of that class. Dot points, and we can just increment that by doing plus plus. One thing that we must make sure we do. So once we start the same scene again, everything's gonna be resetted to its default value. Everything but static variables. So a static variable doesn't get its value resetted to its default. Let's say, for instance, that we have this points value that's currently 3 and I end up losing the game. So I'm gonna reload the scene game, and what I expected is that points gets back to 0, but it doesn't happen. Points keeps being 3 because this is a static field. So what we can do is we can define the void start here, which will be called upon initialization. So when the scene starts again, this function is going to get called, and what I can do here is I can force points to be 0. This is not necessary if points is not a static value, but in case it is, it's important that we do this to avoid having a wrong value, having wrong data inside this variable. And anytime you have static attributes, you must make sure you set them to default value inside the start function or the equivalent, okay? Also inside the Apple, we have this if that tells if the game's over. And instead of calling application.lowlevel game, we're going to create a static function inside the game manager. And the static term holds for functions as well. If it's static, it doesn't need a object reference to get accessed. So this is going to be void. It's not going to return anything. And I'm going to call it game over. So when the game is over, what's going to happen is I'm basically going to call application.lowlevel game, and that's it. So it's basically useless, but in the future, this function is going to change, and this is a good way for us to change the place where such important operation is happening. Now, instead of calling application.lowlevel game inside the Apple, we're just going to change this. We're just going to change the owner of that operation to be the game manager. So we're going to call game manager dot game over. So by doing this, we can make sure we do this kind of operations inside the game manager and not the Apple. So this is just a good practice of coding, okay? So now we need a way to dynamically place these wood blocks inside our scene, and we're gonna do this in the next lecture.